Once again, this is Nuance, and I am Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. We will be speaking about the mayor's ordered budget cuts, and they are steep in a little bit here. But first, what's going on with you, Jay?
Uh, you know, getting up and at 'em in the morning. Spent the last couple of days on a project. I finally finished it. Finished a project for my uncle, my eldest uncle, who is a Vietnam veteran, and he's been working tirelessly for the benefit of not only Vietnam vets but other veterans. And he does speaking engagements, he does events, and so I put together a page for him because he wanted to put a video out to talk about his experience coming back from Vietnam, the PTSD he went through and being undiagnosed and living with that and the troubles that caused, and just make a call to action for veterans, the younger veterans as well, to go seek help because it's out there. Unlike when the Vietnam vets came home, a lot of the things weren't there, especially available to them. But now these guys coming back from like Iraq and Afghanistan, all of this stuff is out there and it's available. So he said, yeah. So I wanted to put that message out there. So
It sounds like a good project to work on. Someone recently said to me something which I thought was pretty insightful. He said, when you work for yourself, you think in terms of projects, not days, right? Not time. I think that is something we end up doing, right? We can be working on a project for days and not even thinking about the time. We're thinking about, I'm off today and working tomorrow, that kind of thing. No, so we got to get this project done, and then we'll think about taking a break.
right, yeah, like that was I made that one a priority. So the other projects, anything else I was working on, I was like, let me finish this first. So it was putting together not only the video but putting the resources and stuff together. So like an about you page where I did like his detail, his military service, his story going from where he went to how he's where he's at now as far as using his healing to help others, and then a resources page for veterans where there are just links to various programs and things that they could use to get help, like the VA,
Mm.
and then a page for resources of remembering veterans. Talking first about the Vietnam story and how those veterans, when they came back, how they were treated and what the difference was, but also things people can go through to get some more education so that people don't forget about these guys. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so it took a little bit of time, but got through.
Yeah, yeah. If it's important work and if you think it's meaningful work, that helps you get through it, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's felt like I needed to get it done.
Well, there you go. That's an accomplishment. Speaking of meaningful work, I was happy to be at NYU this past week,
Yes, I
speaking
saw that.
with the students, joining the Queens Link team. And I got to give a shout out to Andrew Lynch, the chief design officer, who gave a phenomenal presentation to the students at NYU. He spoke to them more like a peer, but I do like the way that he put his presentation together because it was educational. And I wasn't expecting that aspect. Of course, you're expecting to learn about the project, but the way he structured it, he was giving advice on when they're out in the world doing their advocacy or working on similar type projects or a different project, but maybe infrastructure related or whatever, or even anything in the political space. He was saying these are some of the issues that we've encountered along the way, and this is our advice as you're going to be navigating this, and you might run into something similar. You might want to keep your eye out for this. And so I liked that tone that he struck because he was coming at them as really a peer on one hand, but also someone who happened to be a little bit older and maybe more experienced in that world and had some lessons that he learned himself that he was now sharing with them, right? So it was at the same time casual and conversational, and but also it felt a little bit like a class, but like a cool casual class. And so I did appreciate that effort he put into structuring it that way.
Yeah, that looked like it was a good event, and you're right up on it. So
Of course, I wanted to join that discussion. I serve as counsel and legal advisor to the Queens Link project. we were joined by several others, Rick Horan, Miriam, Paul Trust, Noel. By the way, Noel put out a video on TikTok that went viral. I think went over 100,000 views. We got 1,000 new followers, something like that. It was a
Wow.
pretty big thing. Yeah, so Queens Link team was in full effect, and they're all out there putting the work in, and I'm so proud of the work that they've been doing. I wanted to join and throw in my 2 cents where needed. Part of the discussion ended up being about, well, what is the opposition to the plan? What are people saying? Basically, you're giving this nice presentation on a project, and they were very well versed in it already because I believe this was an urban planning club, something like that. So they were looking at these projects already at school and in their club. And so they wanted to meet with us and let us talk to them. So someone asked, what are people saying out there in the community that are against it? Like they couldn't really understand, or they're trying to get a sense of why people would oppose this. And the usual NIMBY concerns came up. And I actually told Andrew at one point, explain NIMBY, because he kept saying NIMBY this, NIMBY that, without any kind of context. Even on one of the slides, I said NIMBY a bunch of times on it. I said, well, explain what NIMBY is in case someone doesn't understand. And he said, come on, not in my backyard. He's like, does everyone here know what NIMBY is? And they all nodded their head yes. And then they don't let you in NYU if you don't know what a NIMBY is. And then they all laughed. But I thought that some context could have been needed, even if they did know. I mean, you don't assume that everyone knows what the acronym stands for.
Right. When you introduce an acronym, especially an so-called industry-specific type of acronym, you always want to first say the whole thing, and then you start to use it. Don't just automatically go in. Even if it is, unless, it's still a good practice to do.
Right. And it's funny because I was observing the students. During the presentation, they're all very quiet and respectful, polite, but the demeanor is noticeably different. I got to be honest, from when I was in college, right? I went to a computer school, Polytechnic University, which is now NYU Poly. But even for a computer school, I think the kids were a little more, I don't know if rambunctious is the word. They were a little more maybe outgoing, puffing their chest out a little bit, a little more assertive in the way that they carried themselves in an interpersonal relationship, or even with a teacher, you know what I mean? Like they just might have a little bit of a different energy to them. You could tell these kids grew up in a social media generation, right? And their demeanor is a lot more laid back. It was different. There was different air in that room, right? And so for most of the talk, everyone was just kind of staring straight ahead with kind of a blank look on their face. And so I didn't know, were they into it? Were they not interested? Were they bored? Were they not getting it? Are they not engaging with this? And so that's why I even said, when he mentioned NIMBY a bunch of times, I was like, well, for those who don't know, explain NIMBY. And then they all just went like this, like, they know what NIMBY is, right? But I realized that's just the demeanor. I think it's just, so that, in colleges, you hear about that. People kind of, and not just in colleges, but I think younger people generally now carry themselves a little bit differently. But once we got to the Q&A portion and we opened it up to a big discussion, then everyone kind of came alive. It took a bit, it was kind of like slow. One guy asks a question and someone else asks, but then after a while, it kind of opens up, and now we're having this dialogue. And you could tell everyone was very interested and engaged in the topic and well-versed and knowledgeable, right? And they're asking very intelligent questions. But one of the points that I wanted to bring up was, when we were speaking of the opposition to the project, we're not only speaking to opposition to a train line, we're talking about systemic inequity, meaning South Queens was deliberately cut off from the rest of the borough and from the rest of the city. And you can look at the history with Robert Moses, dumping all the projects in Rockaway, the way that the parkway system was designed, the train system, everything. This was done intentionally, deliberately. And so you are trying to overcome a system of injustice and of segregation. It isn't just a matter of some people want to train, some people don't want to train. It's really a bigger battle, I think. And sometimes I think that piece of it might get lost, right? Because we're having these fights over the train, and some people say, well, they just want the park, and some people want the train, some people want both. But what is the context of this battle? Why is there opposition in the first place? Why is South Queens segregated from the rest of Queens in the first place, to the point where you need this train? Why is it so important that we bring this back? And I think it's important to put that into its context. And that's why this is some heavy lifting. It's a worthwhile fight, but it is a tough one, because you're trying to overturn an unfair system. It's not just about building a train. You can build a train anywhere. And yeah, there are train lines that are met with a lot less resistance in other places. Well, why is that? And I was not shy to even mention that. Not everyone, in fact, most people are not going to say it. But there is that element of we don't want people from South Queens and the Rockaways coming into our neighborhood. That certainly exists, right? And that's a side effect and a remnant and, you know, a sign of the segregation that is there and was there by design, and why there people are trying to resist overcoming it. I mean, this shouldn't be a surprise. It's not right.
Right.
It's something that we fight, but it's important to understand that. And I think once you do understand that, you see why that opposition is going to be there.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that is important to recognize, that it's not just about just a single train line, that full context, and which gives that backdrop to why this can be such a big fight.
Right.
So,
right.
yeah.
And why it's so meaningful. It's why I am so passionate about the project myself, right? I always say that it's not about saving some time on a commute. It's about connecting Queens.
Right.
And then we start. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, and systemic issues are notoriously difficult to overcome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's also why I think you can get people who might not live along that train line, who might not even use that train necessarily, interested in the project, like an urban development infrastructure club class at NYU, right? I mean,
right.
There are people who might be interested in that, in the system of New York City, and how you do have, despite its diversity, a lot of segregation that persists, and how something like this could be a step towards undoing some of that, really integrating. It's really sad when you think about it. In the year 2023, almost 24, we're talking about having to integrate society like it's the civil rights era, but we are dealing with that still, right? It's new words, and we don't talk about it the same way we used to, but these issues are still there, and they're kind of embedded in our society, even in a place like New York City, in a place like Queens, right? And it's important to keep that in mind too.
Absolutely. And the thing is, you said an important word there. You said embedded. When it becomes embedded in the society, embedded in the system, that when you go to change that, or try to change that, people feel like this is like an attack on their way of life. Like this is something that's out of left field, when it's like, this shouldn't have been the case in the first place. Just because it has become normalized doesn't mean that it's the right way to go about doing something. So it becomes that, so rooting that out is more difficult.
Right. And then some, I think, oppose it, maybe not even knowing why they're so viscerally opposed to it. And that's just kind of there, right? That segregation, that nastiness, all the negativity that comes with it, it's just baked into the cake, to the point where some people nowadays might not even know what's going on either side of the issue. They might not know why they're fighting this way or that way, but it's just there. It's like that undercurrent that persists. And we don't always recognize it, but it's still there.
Right. And some of these issues are so embedded, and have been embedded for so long and in so many different places, that when recognizing it, you find all these threads to where they come from, and it just looks like you're just completely attacking everything. But it's like, well, look at where the roots were.
Yeah.
Here, and it's all things. Like, it's more than we thought, and we have now since forgotten where it started, because it's become normalized.
Yeah. But see, the beauty of a project like this is you can build a coalition and get people who have all different interests on board with the train, no pun intended, right? Because some people will say, yeah, it's better for my constituents to commute, to get to work and school. Some people will focus on the economic development, right? Some people will talk about the equity issues, but you have people who might be focused on all different components of it, who will find the benefit in it. And then you could build a broad coalition, and you're actually making progress in society by focusing on this one issue, that not everyone might be doing it to make that same kind of progress. Maybe they're doing it for other reasons, but it's one of those things that is popular with good reason, right? Because it does serve many different purposes. For me, it's symbolic in a sense. I mean, it's not even really symbolic. It's more than that. It's concrete. But I look at it like, yeah, South Queens is cut off from the rest of the city, and that's why people have a hard time getting ahead in these neighborhoods. That's why they're held back, and that causes many other issues, right? So if you can undo that, then you're going to go a long way towards addressing those other problems, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And so, I've always said that this is a very important issue for a number of reasons, but it's good that you can get so many people on board for whatever purpose, whatever agenda they have. I think it's just so useful, such a benefit to the public that you can see a reason to support it, coming at it from any number of angles. But one thing that was interesting that came out of the discussion was it was mentioned, I think it was Paul who mentioned that he met someone upstate New York, and I guess he said that he was fighting for the Queens Link down in Queens or what have you. And the person he met upstate said that they read the New York Times article that came out last year, and they had a discussion with their family on it. And I guess they went around the dinner table and had a vote. Who thinks we should have a park? Who thinks we should have a train based on the article? And it was just a reminder that those New York Times articles really spread. It's not just a local paper. People in upstate New York are reading it and taking votes at the dinner table about what they read. That's kind of wild, right? To think about that.
What was the outcome of the vote?
I don't know. It wasn't said in that. I could ask Paul, but
okay.
It is interesting. And also the fact that, and I think we mentioned this at the talk at NYU, that the New York Times article, as many of the articles, many of the media likes to portray it as train versus park, and kind of ignore the fact that our plan is calling for rails plus trails, right? We want both. But the sexier headline to sell to the general public is there's a clash, there's a battle on the tracks, train versus park. Who's it going to be? We're going to butt heads. They don't want to make it look like the reality of the situation, which is that there is a lot of compromise. Our side is offering the compromise. Maybe that might be somewhere hidden in the article, but they want to present it as one versus the other, right? For the sensationalism. And that's especially true of a paper like the Times. That's, as they pointed out to me, one of the reporters once said to me, we're not selling these articles to local New York City folks. We're selling these articles to people in rural Ohio or Kentucky or anywhere in the country. And so we're trying to get that attention grabbing headline and even the story, right? They want to make something sensational. And so you do see that. That's why you saw upstate when they had this conversation, it was, which one do you want more, or which one does Queens deserve more, however they put it, the park or the train. The conversation wasn't, should they do both, as we're trying to do. It was one or the other, because that's how the headline portrays it.
Right. And I think it's, and we've talked about this before in regards to media, when they present it in certain lights like that, it can be, it can be, I don't know if I can say disastrous, but it can be, a negative on the movement that you're trying to execute. Because if it's not giving the full context, if it's not giving some of the things behind what you're doing, and instead of only focusing on an aspect that makes this sensationalist type of thing, then you could potentially lose out on support for the project. You could potentially have others misinformed about the project and the importance of it.
Right.
And so,
like if someone, for example, really wants park space, bike path or whatever, if they lose sight of the fact that our plan incorporates that as well, they might think, well, trains are cool, whatever, but I want the park. They might not realize that, well, if you can have both, what is it's a win-win for everyone. Why would you even dispute that?
Right.
So, and unfortunately, that is part of the coverage that we see. It's more exciting to present it that way, one versus the other. And you're right. It can have negative effects because these papers, what they'll do is they'll try to make it look like a civil war on anything, right? So when it comes to, for example, an election, they'll put pictures of the most extreme candidates and one versus the other and make it look like this is a clash of far this versus far that, and not realize that there's much more nuance in the electorate and in a campaign even. But that's not what sells. They want to make it look like it's like, it's extreme left versus extreme right. Who will prevail? And that is dangerous,
Right. It can be, definitely. It definitely can be. So before we get into the other topics, I want to issue a very dire warning to everybody out there. If you happen to run into, and I guess I'm getting faded here. Let's just see if I can put this up here. If you happen to run into this, leave it alone. These Doritos extra flaming hot are evil. Leave them alone. Run far away from them. These are not for human consumption. They just don't even taste good. They're just they're hot for no reason. Just leave them alone. My whole mouth was burning yesterday. I bought 2 bags. So I'm like, because usually when you get the flaming hot, like the Cheetos or something like that, the regular ones, it's
Mhm.
not really hot. It's got a nice little flavor and there's a kick to it.
Yeah.
This extra, uh, no, it's stupid. It's just stupid.
All right.
No, leave
I
that
didn't think I
alone.
ever heard of that before.
I hadn't either, but I've tried the flaming hot Cheetos and then what was I forget the Mexican tortilla chips. To, I forgot what it is, the tortilla snacks. And
All right.
so sometimes I have the spice and have a good flavor to them. These have no flavor whatsoever. It's just hot.
Okay.
Yeah, so stay away from that.
Well, speaking of staying away, I guess there's an effort to keep Mr. Trump from the ballot based on being involved in an insurrection, right? There's a 14th Amendment argument there.
Right.
No, the 14th Amendment does bar officers of the US from holding office. And we'll talk about the nuance of that if they have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the US. So there are court cases where states are trying to determine whether Trump should be on the ballot for president, given the fact that he has involved himself in an insurrection. This decision in Colorado was interesting, and in fact, is being appealed by both sides. So that should tell you something. When a case is appealed by both sides, that means nobody's happy with the decision.
Yeah, well, I think what was it? The appeal that Trump is more is I don't know if it's the ego. I guess since the
Well,
judge did say
not
that he was a red insurrectionist, he wants to rectify that. But
right, but it's not just about ego. There is a legal reason why you would do that because Colorado isn't the only state that might be
right,
looking to hold him off the ballot, and so he doesn't want to set that precedent that he is an insurrectionist. Because let's say another court now looks at this and they're
right,
trying to determine the one part of it, which is being appealed by Colorado, right? They're trying to determine whether he's an officer of the U.S. Well, they can argue over that, but they don't want the precedent. If you're Trump side, you don't want the precedent out there that a
right,
court may determine that you are an insurrectionist. So the only question left is whether you're an officer, because those are the two
right.
components of this, right? Number one is obviously, did he engage in insurrection? And number two is, if so, does he count? Does the president count as an officer of the U.S. as contemplated by the 14th Amendment? So the court in Colorado found that he is an insurrectionist. However, he can still appear on the ballot because the presidency does not count as an officer of the U.S. as defined by the 14th Amendment. And so obviously, that is the part that Colorado is appealing. It's a bit of an odd decision. Now, the judge's ruling in this has to do with the language of the 14th Amendment. And it says no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any other state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the U.S. or as any member of a state legislature, et cetera, to support the Constitution of the U.S. shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same. So they're saying he did engage in the insurrection or rebellion, right, January 6th, but they're saying that the presidency does not count as an officer under the U.S. And one of the reasons why, according to this ruling, was the language of the amendment mentions elector of president and vice president, but doesn't mention president. It says it lays out, it lists the offices that they had in mind when they wanted to ban people from running, and it didn't mention president. Now, it is an interesting argument, right? Because you would think that if that was contemplated by the drafters of this amendment, they might have included that, right? Because they're saying no person shall be a senator or a congressperson or elector of president. Why wouldn't they say or president or vice president? They're not
Right.
saying that. And that was striking
Right.
to the judge. It is an interesting argument to think about.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you can question why wouldn't they say it? Why didn't they say it? Was it because they assumed that it was explicit? But uh, um, they were very detailed and everything else, it seems like. So maybe there was a reason they left it out, or maybe
Yeah, and it seems we've talked about this
assumption.
before on here. It seems that there is this sacred treatment of the office of the presidency as far as the
Right.
Constitution is concerned, as far as how courts interpret the qualifications for same, right? So you always hear about, well, the Constitution says you must be 35 and a natural born citizen and not much else. And so anytime there's any kind of effort to restrict someone from running for president, it always comes back, well, the Constitution lays out the qualifications very clearly. And I think the reasoning is they don't want to deprive the voters of the right to vote for whomever they want for president if they meet those very basic criteria, right? When you're putting limitations on other offices, you can see it isn't as constitutionally defined as the presidency. And so it becomes easier to set limitations on them. When it comes to the president, it seems like the mentality is, listen, it's the president, it's the biggest, the highest office in the land. And so on the one hand, you might say, well, because it's such a prestigious office, we should be setting more criteria, more qualifications, more restrictions potentially. But on the other hand, I think the prevailing view legally, constitutionally tends to be the people have that holy right, right? That's such a sacred office that we shouldn't be stripping the people of their ability to choose their person.
Right.
And we know that the president isn't directly elected in the US. They do elect electors. And that's what this amendment even talks about, an elector of the president. So that's interesting. You couldn't be part of the electoral college, right? If you were an insurrectionist, but it wouldn't stop an elector who was not barred from being an elector because they were an insurrectionist from voting for an insurrectionist, right? Because that would be, I guess, the will of the people in that scenario. So I understand the arguments, not that I agree with them. I think that you do have a strong argument here because it says, or hold any office, civil or military, under the US.
And that's what I was going to ask, because it does say any office, but then it says civil or military. So then I guess you question whether is the presidency a civil office?
No, it is. I think the question really is it considered an office under the US?
Why wouldn't it?
And I believe the court determined that it wasn't considered. I think that's what the decision was, that it wasn't considered an office under the US. And then I think it even had other examples of how the presidency differs from federal offices. They're saying that it's not considered a federal or a state office. It's its own thing, basically. A little weird.
Who would it be under? Is it under anything then at that point? I mean,
no, they're saying it's not under the US. They're saying it's just president of the US. So it's not an office, you're not under the US. It's not under the US or under any state. They're saying it is the US, basically, right? It's on that top level. It's not like Congress is an office under the US. I don't know. And that's what the judge's rationale. Right. I don't know if I'm really on board with that. To me, it is a federal office under the US. To me, it is. But, to be fair, I haven't done all the legal research on this as the parties have in this case. So I shouldn't speak conclusively on it. But my first impression of it is, I don't know. It sounds like an odd decision. And that's why it's being appealed, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does. I mean, you would assume that, the president is under the US, or later on it says as an officer of the United States. You would assume that the president is also an officer of the United States.
Right. This judge is saying, no, it's not an office. It's not an officer under the US. That's what they're saying.
I mean, and that makes me wonder, okay, well then why would we have a leader that's not a part of the United States?
I'm not saying it's not a part of it. They're saying it's not under the US.
I mean, it's kind of the same thing in that regard. Like, I mean, if you're serving the US,
right,
you're under the US. Like, they're there to serve. They're not there to rule.
And also, they say, or an executive or judicial officer of any state. Okay, so the governor of a state, wouldn't they be an executive officer of that state? I would certainly think so.
A governor, yeah.
Right. And so they're saying that a governor would be barred, but not someone running for president, I guess, under this.
Right. And he'd never held any other position other than...
Well, right. But it wouldn't be what he held as much as what he's running for now. Right?
I think this is talking about anyone who has held any office before, having previously taken an oath as a member of, and then it goes on this line. So
No,
if
right,
he
but
had been a governor before, then it should.
not according to this, because it's saying no person shall be a senator or a congressperson or an elector of president or vice president or hold any office. So the court in Colorado said that this didn't apply to people running for president.
Right, for president. Well, for president, period? For any?
No, for someone running for president. The question is, should he be on the ballot for president? And the court said that the 14th Amendment provision about insurrection does not apply to someone running for president because the office of the president doesn't count as an office under the U.S.
Yeah. I read this as this is disqualification from holding the office.
But it tells you which offices. No person
Right.
shall be a senator or a congressperson or an elector, right? Or hold any office under the U.S. And so they're saying that the presidency does not count as an office under the U.S. They're saying that he does meet the insurrection piece of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, they've done
I
the
think
research. Myself,
that's a funny distinction also now reading this because, and I don't know if this was done intentionally or not when it was drafted, but if you notice the first provision here says under the United States, right? And then if you keep on reading a little bit, the next one says an officer of the United States. So it seems like it's saying that no person shall be any of these things, or hold any office under the U.S. if, as an officer of the U.S., they engaged in insurrection. So,
and I think personally, he did both as an officer.
So the court is saying that he did the insurrection, and I believe they're saying that he acted as an officer of the U.S. when he did that.
Right.
But they're saying that running for president doesn't count as an office under the U.S., as the first provision says. So if they would have changed that under to of and have them both say of, then he might have been covered under this ruling.
Yeah. And so
it's strange to me. It is strange. And the courts sometimes do this. They'll sometimes reach this conclusion that seems to have been reached with logic that you don't understand or you didn't see coming, right? It's like, I understand them saying that he could run for president because they didn't consider that to be an insurrection on his part. But they're not saying that. They're saying he absolutely is an insurrectionist, but because it's under or not of or whatever, it's weird. It's weird. And it is going to be, and here's the bottom line on this. It is being appealed, like we said, by both parties.
Right.
It's very likely going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't think we have a lot of faith in what the U.S. Supreme Court is going to do.
No, they're going to definitely side with the side that says that he can continue to run.
Right. They might even side with the side that says he's not an insurrectionist at all.
Right. And and that could be part of the strategy. Push it to the Supreme Court because he's got a conservative chance there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very crazy. But like you said, they're going to be appealing it on both fronts. Right now, are there more cases like this being held across the country?
I believe so.
So there could be potential to have an opposing decision from a different judge.
Right. And that's one of the reasons why a case will go to the Supreme Court, right? The circuit split. One court does one thing, one does another thing. Now the Supreme Court has to come in and give the final say on it. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Politically, I'm not sure it's the best tactic to take if you're trying to win the election. But I do think taking the politics out of it, just thinking of it legally and morally, I think that anyone who engaged in an insurrection, who's essentially declared himself or herself an enemy of the U.S., should not be allowed to run for office. I mean, that's logical to me, right? But as a political strategy, I don't know if it would actually help the Democrats. It might backfire in the sense that it might look like they're doing whatever they can to cheat. Look, they're trying to steal it again. They might start saying things like that.
Right. No, I agree. And you would think that any citizen in the country would agree with that you wouldn't want an insurrectionist running for office, especially the highest office in the land. But then you're going to get into that that split there of people saying, well, he wasn't an insurrectionist, and even though the court is said, yeah, okay, he is, but in people's minds, no, he wasn't an insurrectionist. That wasn't what it was. But just on its face value, you would think you wouldn't want anyone doing that running for office.
Right, right. Although there is that philosophy that's out there that the power should be with the people. And so if the people don't want someone like that running, well, then the people don't have to vote for that person.
That's true too. That's true. So
I think that is, like I said, I think that's why it is difficult, especially when you're talking about the president, why it's so hard to put legal restrictions on it, because it's looked at as disenfranchising the people, right? The power is supposed to be with the people to choose their leader.
Right. And idyllic thinking would be good and bad, right? Whether they choose a bad leader or choose a good leader, it's up to the people to make that decision.
Right. Right.
Because if you do start putting restrictions on it, then the question will become up, well, then who's running the show? Are you in power just to stay in power? Are you in power to make sure that it's done this way or not?
Right. Although we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we have three branches of government. One of them is the judicial branch. And so they are tasked with interpreting the Constitution, interpreting the laws, judging whether laws passed by the legislature and signed by the executive are constitutional, are lawful.
Right.
So it is part of that system of checks and balances we have. And if something is illegal, then they're supposed to call it out and make the necessary ruling. I mean,
they're supposed to, but
that applies to elections as well. If someone doesn't qualify for the ballot, let's say, well, it's up to the courts to make that determination. So this is, I guess, another iteration of election law, albeit with very high stakes.
Very high stakes. And with, if you're talking about going to the judicial branch where things are kind of stacked in one favor at this point. So it's,
I don't really see any scenario under which they say he can't run. Although they have come out with rulings that were adverse to his interests, right? Which always raised eyebrows. Like, wow, his appointees are going against him. But something like this, though, he appointed them. This is the cynic in me, but I don't think it's just me. I think most people probably feel that way, right? In spite of what the Constitution is, I don't see the Supreme Court making that decision.
No, this is going to be split along the normal lines, right? The conservatives, the people he appointed are going to be like, yeah, he can run, and then the other sides be like, no, like he shouldn't be able to run.
Right.
And of course, since they have the majority, that's what it's going to be. He's going to be able to run. Now, this could potentially be. It could be an out for the Republican Party, because. Like we've known, the Republican Party from when his first election is very different than the Republican Party now. We know that they didn't want him then, but they really couldn't stop him. Right. Because because of the support he had, he could have just, if they said, yeah, we're going to make sure you don't run, he could have gone his own way and taken half of their votes, and they would have not been able to come to the party. And he can do that again today. Just that the Republican Party is made up of a lot more people who are on his side, even though we have seen a little bit of snake eating its own tail recently with people trying to get their position by knocking some of things that he's done. But overwhelmingly, he's still got that support. If that core of the Republican Party is still in that mindset of we're only dealing with Trump because we have to, because he could basically take our vote, split our vote so much that we couldn't win. This could be an out for them to be like, oh, sorry, nothing we could do. The Supreme Court said you can't run, dude. There's nothing we can do about it.
Well, so if the Supreme Court would actually say that, but I don't think they
will. Right.
Yeah. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, he enjoys about 35% of that Republican vote, which is just locked down, right? 35% of I believe, of the vote is just his. It seems like nothing he can do would make that go away.
Right. So I mean, he's got that whole party by the sack.
But here's something else, though. Thinking about it, you are seeing candidates drop out now, right? We saw Tim Scott drop out, like Pence drop out. Who was the latest one to go off? You're hearing it pretty often. If DeSantis drops out, and I think that's actually coming, believe it or not, and it ends up being a one-on-one with him versus Nikki Haley, it could get interesting, right? The reason why he was able to win that first primary was because it was so split. And I think it was too late by the time people started dropping it. They were dropping it after the primaries were being held and he was racking up the delegates and what have you. But let's say prior to the first primary, prior to January, it evolves or devolves, however you want to look at it, into a one-on-one. That would be interesting. I think on a one-on-one, Nikki Haley could potentially win that.
I don't know. I don't think she has what it takes to beat Trump in that regard.
But he's only got 35% of the supporters. I mean, how many of the Republican electorate, primary voters are never Trumpers? Probably it's got to be close to 50% of them, right?
Nah, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I think I think even the never Trumpers are gonna, or not all of them, but if it comes down to a general, they're gonna put their support behind him so that the party can win.
Yeah. I'm not talking about general though. I'm talking about in a primary.
Yeah, I don't think she could beat him. I don't think anyone on that side can
On a one-on-one. A one-on-one?
I don't think so. I don't think so. For some reason, people just eat up his nonsense. They just eat it up. And then don't forget, whatchamacallit is, I think he's still in the race, isn't it? The Vivek or whatever? Or has he dropped out yet? He's still in the race.
He's still in the race.
He needs to go.
I can see him dropping out too.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. It's interesting to think about because he's done so well with the party splintered so much. And I think that's why people are starting to drop out now. They're realizing the only chance of beating him is to coalesce around one candidate, which is going to be Haley. It's got to be in this primary field. I don't see anyone else. It's not DeSantis. DeSantis lost all of his juice. He's done, right? So
he doesn't have the personality.
No. So it could happen, especially if these criminal trials proceed, because at a certain point, I think even the Republican electorate is going to see that he's going to be unelectable, right? They're going to want to win more than they want him as their candidate.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you got people, some of his, especially his diehards, who basically compare him to a biblical figure.
Right,
they go.
That's a very small number.
Yeah, but that's a dangerous thing. That's people who hold those core beliefs and that spread that belief. And there are a lot of Trump people. Now, on the other side, his popularity and support in that ideology doesn't seem to have been enough to sustain the platforms of Truth Social and Parler, because both of those, Parler already went under. Truth Social has lost $78 million in the last 2 years. So even though that is a strong base moving forward, maybe it's not as solid as some might think. It's not.
It's really not. It's not. It's just that you have people who are very vocal, right? Who will make the most noise on it. Yeah. But if you look at the numbers, like I said, I think it's about a third, maybe 35% of the Republican voters are solid for him. But that leaves a lot of room to do things.
It does.
And I think I said this before, if he is convicted criminally, now we have to look at the timeline. I know some of these courts are trying to move up on the timeline. I know he's trying to delay everything until after the election, right? But if they move forward and he's convicted criminally on some of these serious charges, these felony charges, I don't think he's going to win. I don't think he will win behind bars. It's possible. I don't think so, though. I think the support is going to drop because you can't look at it in terms of who are the diehards. You have to look at the people in the middle, the swing voters who can go either way.
Right.
Who voted for Biden last time. I know people are disappointed, and we can talk about that whole thing about how the rebound of the economy wasn't as fast as some people would want, and that always happens, right? When there's a rebound, a lot of people say, well, it's not fast enough, and, okay. But even with all that, I don't see a whole lot of people siding with the convicted felon at the end of the day. His diehards are going to die hard. But the people who can go either way, they didn't vote for him in 20. I don't think they can say, I'm disappointed in the economy, but I'm going to go with the guy behind bars. I don't think they're going to say that. And in fact, when you look at the election results, in spite of what the polls say now, look at the actual election results that have happened. They've actually been very kind to Democrats. I think the polls actually showed the Republicans doing much better than they ended up doing in the past few years. Look at the midterms last year. Look at what happened in the elections that were on the ballot this year in various states. The Democrats really overperformed, and I think that's catching some people by surprise.
But I don't know. I mean, I hear you and I agree, but I don't think we can attribute or compare Republican Party performance to Trump performance.
He kind of have right. He's not on the ballot himself, but you kind of have to make that connection. Or conversely, you could look at Democratic Party performance as Biden performance, because that's what people do. They look at who's on top, right? Who's the figurehead, who's the leader, so to speak, of that party.
Yeah. But I think Trump is an entity unto himself. I mean, I think you can definitely draw some correlations to that.
Yeah.
But we've seen like a lot of GOP hopefuls or even people in elected office have tried to follow Trump's path, right? But it doesn't work for them. It works for him for some reason, but it doesn't work for them. Like they can't get away with the same things he can get away with. And so I think there's correlations, but not exactly a one-to-one. There's just something that he's appealing to a certain group, right, or a large enough group. And part of it, I think, also is he does have the GOP by the nuts. Like, I mean, even if it's a 35%, that's enough to make sure that no one else in the party gets into office if he takes 30% of the vote and walks away with it.
Yeah, but here is the other side of it. So yes, I agree that he is a unique figure and he brings out voters who might not vote if he's not on the ballot. And maybe you're seeing that in some of these states. But he also brings out a lot of voters to vote against him when he's running.
Absolutely.
And so in a presidential year, especially one where he, let's say, is the Republican nominee, you're going to get a much higher Democratic turnout than you saw this year and even last year, right, where Democrats did well. So now take their victories from 2022 and 23 and add millions more voters who are coming out to vote against him. So I think that effect, you shouldn't discount that effect. Yes, more people will show up on both sides, but I think it is going to invigorate the base, certainly on the Democratic side, and you'll get more kids, more young people, more people who don't usually vote, people who just come out in droves and say, we can't have this guy in office again.
Yeah, I hope that's what happens. I think there a few things are going to bring a few more people out this time, and at this Israel-Palestine conflict is definitely going to spur more people either to get involved or to be more disillusioned. There's going to be something in that regard. But yeah, with Trump, some things it's like all bets are off.
It's just unpredictable.
He's very unpredictable, and he just holds too much sway. Even if it's all BS, there's just too many people that fall for it and follow it. That I don't know. It's not.
How many times can you keep singing the same song though? When
he's been doing it for a while now, and people, but he has.
Right, but he also lost by millions of votes both times.
That's true,
and
that's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
Lost the electoral college last time, so
that's absolutely true. I think your point about some of the people dropping out and deciding they're going to coalesce around one or two other candidates to get things moving. You think that might be a strategy for DeSantis? Like, let me just try and wait until so many people drop out, and then maybe I can pick up some more support from people looking for a different candidate.
No, I think DeSantis is next to drop out. Keep your eye on Yahoo News, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, whatever you look at. Keep your eye on it. Fair enough. I mean, that headline is coming soon.
Fair enough. I mean, they actually started looking at dropping out about a month or so ago. Like it's been.
His campaign is going nowhere fast. I think his mindset now is, I dipped my toe into the pool, the national pool. It didn't go the way I wanted it to this time around, but that's okay. I'm going to drop out before the first voting happens to save face, and maybe in 4 years try again.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen it the last time. Even if he does drop out, we're not done.
Yeah, no. That's why he would be dropped. To be clear, he's dropping out, in my opinion, because he's trying to keep himself fresh to run next time.
Right. Yeah. We're not done with the plague of DeSantis.
So. No, but we also saw that it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be on the national stage, right? He doesn't have the charisma.
No, he doesn't have the charisma, but he does have the deviousness, the political acumen to get some of this stuff that most people would be opposed to get it passed through. And we've seen what he's done in Florida. So he would be
I
dangerous
wonder though,
on a
if
national
this is
stage.
going to have an ill effect on him in Florida. I wonder if he was exposed being on the national stage, if more people in Florida wake up to him like, this is our governor. How did this happen?
I don't know. I don't think so. I just don't have a lot of faith in Florida. I
So
mean,
how do you, I know you live there, but how do you become governor of a state like Florida as such a charisma vacuum? I mean, you would think it's not running for president, but it's still a big state in the country, right? You would think you would have to have some kind of bona fides to make it to that level.
I think ideology got him there. It's his ideology.
Yeah.
That hateful ideology is just strong.
It's like
He's
Texas and Texas, right?
Yeah, he's speaking to a large portion of the electorate that still has that ideology in
But
mind. Now it's
yeah,
popular to be okay with it.
right. But you just said popular. You would think there would be someone else who can spew the same things, but actually be interesting when they say them.
You would think, but I mean,
I
look
guess
at
it comes down to money, right? Having those connections to deep pockets and donors and being able to play that political thing. It's
and
not something
poor
anyone could do. You know, if I think if you had someone who was as well connected as him and had that same donor base, but was more interesting, they give him a run
right.
for his money. But maybe that person just isn't out there.
Yeah, Florida doesn't make a lot of good choices when it comes to governor. I mean, they had not only Rick Scott, then they had the human phallus looking thing, Tim, whatever his name was. And then oh no, not Tim. Was it Scott? It was Scott,
Rick
was
Scott, Rick
Rick
Scott,
Scott. Rick Scott. And then before that was what was it, Jeb?
Jeb Bush. Yeah. What about Charlie Crist?
I didn't know a lot about Christ, but yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a crazy thing.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on what happens and what the people do. We're actually not far off from the presidential primaries. They're going to start in January. I
Right.
think April is when New York gets it, but by the time it comes to New York, it's all but decided. So it's not as exciting here. Um,
Right.
but speaking of what the people decide, we had a poll from last week.
We did. Yes, we did. The poll last week was talking about Mayor Adams' situation. As we know, recently the FBI swooped in and seized some personal electronic devices, iPads, phones, and this and that from the mayor after a what was it? An event over the potential allegations that his campaign colluded with the Turkish government. Um, and so our question was, do you believe Mayor Adams should resign over the FBI investigation concerning the potential collusion with the Turkish government for illegal campaign contributions?
Mm.
And the votes are kind of mixed. So 61% said yes, 22% said no, and 17% said I don't know.
61% saying he should resign.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
My question, though, is how many of those just didn't like him in the first place and are using this as an excuse? And how many of them believe this is the reason why he should resign?
Yeah. Yeah. There could be. From the comments, there were a couple of things. One person said, in spite of a lot of incriminating evidence, they tend to favor waiting until the FBI completes their investigation. If the allegations are true, then he must resign. And then another person was saying that from everything they've read, he should resign on the general principle of being a wolf in Democratic clothing. So I think that speaks to what you just said as far as people maybe not liking him, period.
A wolf in Democratic clothing. So they're saying he's not really a Democrat.
Right, more Republican ideology than Democrat, I would assume.
To be fair, he was once a registered Republican.
Right. So, yeah. So that's you know, interesting. There has been a lot. Like it wasn't just his stuff and him under investigation. There were a lot of people around him. Their stuff was also seized. And then there was, I think earlier this year, there was also some people connected to him as well. So it doesn't look too good. But he hasn't been charged with anything. The investigation's not complete. We don't know if the allegations are true or not.
Right.
So,
And that's the thing. This stuff all takes time. Now, for
right,
them to seize his phones suggests that there is something there that at least they thought was substantial enough. They don't just seize a
right,
mayor's phone without really thinking that they have something. And of course, going through
right.
the proper channels, right? Getting the right warrants and what have you. So that is something that shows there's at least reasonable suspicion. And I think they're thinking that there's a case to be made here potentially. But
Right.
how long would that take to play out? I mean,
Right. He could be out of office by the time the whole court
I
case.
was just thinking that too, right? I mean, you only have 2 terms as mayor, 8 years. He's already done a couple of them. And I sound cynical here. I'm involved in cases myself now, civil cases, but still, that have taken years. And I'm thinking, is 8 years enough time? It should be. It certainly should be, right? But
Right,
if the
right,
investigations continue for years and years and years, and then an indictment finally happens, and then he says, well, I'm not going to resign because I only have a year left in office, or whatever, right? Like,
right,
is it going to happen in time? I don't know.
right, right. But then at the end, we've also seen cases where something happens and the news breaks and a politician resigns just for this same ideology and they prematurely resign. Like and Al Franken comes to mind on that. Like just resign because the optics looked bad, even though nothing had been decided, nothing had been, found guilty. He hadn't been found guilty of anything or whatever it was. It's just the
George Brand
allegations.
wanted to run for president.
And so like, you know, you would think you'd want to wait until we get more concrete information. But I
Yeah,
understand
it's premature. It is premature unless he knows something that we all
yeah,
know. If he
right,
realizes he's going to actually be indicted and he's guilty or whatever. But
right,
just with this information that's out there now that we have, I would say
right.
it's premature to resign. Certainly.
Right. And it doesn't seem, I mean, I can understand calls for it saying it could just the fact that there's an investigation could hinder him doing his duties, but I don't see that happening. If it is happening, then that may be something to look at on his side, and that would
Yeah.
be something he would decide and the people could call for. But and then we also have to keep in mind just because they took his phone, I don't know if they've said specifically they're looking at him. They could be looking for information to get the people that they've already gotten. There were people nearby him this recently and earlier this year. They could be looking stuff that could build their case for against those people. So,
Right. Right. We're seeing if he's implicated or if there's
right,
anything on his phone that would bolster the case against the other people that are involved. So,
right,
yeah.
exactly. So, yeah, I think it's for me. I think it's premature, but it doesn't look good. The
Yeah. The other
FBI
thing is,
doesn't do that.
this relates to this discussion we were just having with the 14th Amendment in the insurrection case. There are a number of people, a very large number of people in the country and even in New York City who hold the view that politicians are being unfairly attacked and investigated, especially by the FBI, right? By the FBI, by the federal authorities, whatever. They look at it like a witch hunt. And that might be what they're thinking with this. Now, of course, Adams now is a Democrat, so I don't know if people who are defending Trump are going to be defending Adams necessarily, but there might be people who have that kind of mentality at this point that, they persecute all the politicians. It's just what they do. And to be fair, if you are in a high position like that, you are scrutinized very heavily.
Sure.
When it comes to campaign finance in New York City in particular, they really go after everyone. I mean, I've not been investigated, but every campaign in the city is audited. It's not a pleasant experience. I mean, when we talk about an audit, they really are digging deep into everything that you're doing, and so they don't play around when it comes to campaign finance,
Right.
It shouldn't be a surprise that the mayor of the city of New York would be scrutinized to a high degree, right?
Right.
Again, it is unusual to see the FBI seize the mayor's phone. That seems like a step beyond what you would expect. But this idea that the mayor would be scrutinized and investigated, right? What does that mean? I can see that. I can see a president, a governor, a mayor being investigated. It doesn't mean that they're guilty or they're going to be indicted with anything, but they're looking into things, right, to make sure that there is no crime there.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Again, you just have to keep in mind that when it comes to seizing a phone and getting a warrant for someone's property, you are showing the court that there's reasonable suspicion that
Right.
there is a crime, right? So that tells you it is more than just we're looking at it, because
Right.
To get to
They
that
had to
point,
justify it.
yeah, it does take something to get to that point. So
Right.
that's I think the part of it that makes us think this is potentially serious, but we have to wait to see what happens.
All right. And before we wrap up, there was another point here relating to Mayor Adams as
Yeah,
well.
definitely wanted to talk about this. The budget cuts that he is ordering, the city council can push back on this, but I think he had previously ordered all city agencies to cut 5% or to find ways to cut down by 5%. And now
Right.
there are additional cuts that he is ordering, all in response to the migrant crisis. And what he's saying is basically a warn job, right? And
Right.
he's looking for more help from the federal government and whatnot, but he's saying the money simply isn't here to do all we need to do with the migrant crisis that we're dealing with. And so
Right. And
he's
he
ordering more
said,
cuts, to the tune of billions, though. I mean, this is the big money we're talking about. Now we're talking about potential, loss of sanitation services, of police, of fire, libraries, parks. I mean, you're talking about everything, right? And so this is going to affect people in their day-to-day lives. And maybe that's what he is going for. Maybe he wants people to feel it. Although maybe an odd choice for someone running for re-election, I don't know. But maybe the strategy is if people feel the pain, then they'll collectively step up and demand something better. The problem is they're going to demand it of him, and he's not really in a position to deliver it.
or it's just that the budget crunch is such that there has to be cuts, otherwise they can't do what needs to be done. He has been saying this for, we've talked about this several times. He's
Yeah.
been talking about like the budget crisis that they're having to deal with, what they're outlaying to deal with the migrant crisis coming in. And at some point it was going to cut into New Yorkers' daily lives, because that money that's being spent on the migrant crisis would normally be spent in these other areas. And if they don't have the money coming in to pay for all that, something's gonna be cut. So it could just be the reality of the situation.
Yeah. Part of the criticism coming from the city council is that he has been relying on for-profit contractors for homeless services for the migrants, whereas historically the city has used not-for-profits, which are supposed to be cheaper, right? We see that's not always the case, but at least in theory, they should be cheaper. And so the city council is pushing back, saying this is partly a crisis of his own creation. Of course, they haven't seemed to be too kind on the whole to his
Right.
calls, right? He's been crying for a while, saying that we need to do something about this. And it
Right.
seems like they're saying, I don't know, maybe they don't want the heat in their own districts. I don't know what it is, but they're basically saying it's your problem.
Right. And I think he got the same response from the governor and from the federal government as well, it seemed
Right.
like.
Right.
So I mean, what is he to do if people aren't going to either come to the table and try to help hash this out? He's going to have to make some decisions, because ultimately it will fall on his shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
we wanted to ask the people out there, and I guess this one would apply to New York City residents, right? But we wanted to ask, as the poll of the week, are you personally concerned that the proposed budget cuts in New York City will affect your day-to-day life in a negative way?
yeah, I think people may not realize it, but if you're talking about cutting back on sanitation, you're talking about cutting back on what was it? The libraries are going to be
Yeah.
closed on Sundays now. That's not just that doesn't just affect people who go to the library to read something, but it could be where kids go to study. It could be whatever.
Use the
And so
computer.
you got to make other arrangements, other plans, other situations. So what'd you say?
I said to use the computer. I believe the study came
Use the
out
computers.
a couple
Yeah.
of years ago showing that a third, I think it was a third, of households in New York City did not have reliable broadband access.
Right.
So they have
So
to use the library and public facilities. Now, if they can't go on Sunday, yeah, that is going to affect many people.
yeah. And then, what does that do for the workers who are working on Sundays? Or are they on a salary, or are they on an hourly wage? Do they not have that day of work now, that income?
Yeah, and some jobs are being cut, some programs are being cut entirely.
Right.
There was an article about, I believe it was an employment program to the Parks Department that is being eliminated as a result of these budget cuts. Now, he did say that, or at least he hopes that the NYPD and the FDNY and the sanitation will not be affected by the subsequent cuts, right? But I believe they are feeling it from the current cuts that are on the table. I mean, this is just an ongoing process here. And this is affecting the current fiscal budget. Of course, when we go into next year's budget that the city council has to pass, we're going to be dealing with, we have to assume, more of these cuts, right? Unless something
Right.
significant is done about the crisis.
Right. And we did question in a discussion this idea that you mentioned about relying on for-profit companies, like when we were talking about the hotel rooms that they were using and how much it was costing, and it was definitely much more than what would even a regular customer would use to
Yeah.
stay there.
Yeah.
And so I think to me, there is validity to questioning why they're using for-profit contractors versus, some other options, or maybe negotiating better rates.
At the same time, though, right. Well, I think part of it is an issue of space. Part of it
Sure.
is an issue of having to do something quickly on an
Sure.
emergency basis. I know that's an excuse the city likes to use, but when you are dealing with over 100,000 people, you have to
Right.
do something, right? And so
Yeah.
all these
Absolutely.
hotels, many of them are vacant. I can
Right.
see why there's that urge or that thought to
Yeah.
utilize that space and do it that
Yeah.
way.
People have to get in a shelter immediately. Yeah. You can't just have people.
Yeah, and when it comes to opening up a homeless shelter to a nonprofit, there is a lot of red
Right.
tape, right? It's got to be, you got to have the contract approved by the controller, and different things have to happen. But I will say this, and I've dealt with this myself as an attorney. If you look at the contracts for these not-for-profits that run homeless shelters, they have been ballooned to a ridiculous proportion as well. And you can break down and do the math on it and look at, okay, how much money is that supposedly nonprofit getting per person per month? And it's a ridiculous amount. I mean, it's always much more than it costs to pay rent for a one-bedroom apartment, right? And it's crazy.
And it shouldn't be. Like I just that always bothers me when and they do it in various different industries as well. Same with insurance, like, right? The cost of medicine for direct consumer would be billed at a lower rate than it would be billed to the insurance company, and the insurance company is going to be billed multiple times higher for the same thing. And it just makes no sense. I mean, I understand from a profit perspective and this and that, but it just makes things much more difficult than I think it should be.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of greed out there. That's really what it often comes down to. That's why it's kind of laughable when you say we should be using nonprofits. I mean, I think nonprofits should be nonprofits because in some cases, a nonprofit is actually big business.
Absolutely. A lot of cases, there's a lot of big business nonprofits. I mean, the Red Cross, you can't tell me they're not pulling in a bunch of money, worldwide organization. It's big business.
That's why I guess they changed from nonprofit to not for profit, right? They call themselves that, not for profit, to try to make that distinction. We make profit, but that's not what we're for.
Right. So, yeah, it's it's a difficult one. But something definitely has to be done because the people are there, and you can't just have 100,000 people just walking around the street with nowhere to go.
Right.
Especially when winter's coming up.
Do you think that the mayor is going to take most of the heat for this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone's gearing up to do that. I mean, if the city council is criticizing him for what he's doing, the federal government came out and blamed him for not having an exit plan. The governor wasn't really on board with his idea of spreading things around the state to other open areas. Like, I think he's going to get the blame for all of it. I don't, and I don't think it's fair, because the law that's in place that's kind of allowing this to happen, one, was put in place before he became mayor. Two, it's being exacerbated by these GOP governors in some of the other states that are basically shipping people up that way, or making this idea that, yeah, go to New York instead, do this and that. Yeah. And again, the federal government doesn't seem to be looking out. So yeah, I don't think it's fair how, it's kind of left to him to do like that. But, I guess that's heavy.
And then you have the change in immigration policy at the federal level as well.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
People not being made to stay in Mexico pending their asylum hearing, right? They can just come in to
Right.
the US. And so that you're hearing things like, well, they're seeking asylum, but they're not going to get a court date for their asylum hearing for another 10 years or something crazy. In the meantime, I guess New York City has to bear the brunt of it.
Right.
It's interesting to me, though, from a political perspective, if someone were to challenge the mayor, it looks like the left is gearing up to challenge the mayor. I'm not sure if they're going to win that argument politically, because they're saying, as you mentioned in that comment there, he's a wolf in Democratic clothing, right? They're saying that his stance on it is too conservative and he's not kind enough to migrants. He's anti-immigrant, right? We heard that rhetoric.
We heard that.
Sure that's what they will be running on, right? That he's not kind enough to migrants. I'm not sure if that's a winning message, even in a Democratic electorate citywide. I mean, I think that it actually plays into the mayor's hands.
I agree. I mean, you can't say he's not. You can't really say he's not kind enough when he's actually, cutting some of the budget to the rest of the city to make sure that you can still service the immigrants coming in. Like, it'd be a tough fight, and anyone coming in to try to challenge him has to realize that this is going to now fall on their shoulders.
If they're so lucky.
Yeah, if you don't have a solution to this, you gotta know walking into it.
Right, and that's what it is. And we saw the polling showing that an overwhelming majority of New Yorkers believe the migrant crisis to be a serious problem. And so someone's going to be coming in and running and saying that, oh, you're just anti-immigrant by basically ringing the alarm on this. Well, I think most New Yorkers agree that there is an alarm to be rung here. And so I don't think that's a winning strategy. But that's, in my opinion, if there's a primary, that's what's going to end up happening. You're going to have someone coming in on the left to try to challenge him, saying that he's a Dino, or whatever you call that, not democratic enough. And I don't think that's going to work. I actually predict that he would win that and be reelected.
Yeah, I don't know how much more he can do on this front as far as this particular issue.
And who wants to take that on, right? I mean, do you really want to be elected mayor and deal with that right now?
It's a tough fight, especially when you've seen that the federal government is helping, the governor doesn't look to be helping, the city council is not looking like you're walking in and it's going to stand on an island alone in a massive crisis. Like, yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. They always go after the mayor, but as we see, people tend to look at what's happening now and then place the blame on whoever is in office now, even if it was inherited. Sure. The honeymoon phase, right? When they get in now, we'll give you a month, 2 months maybe, but then it becomes your problem. It's not solved, it's your problem. Even if there are trickle-down effects, domino effects, long-term effects happening, maybe it was the previous administration, maybe it was federal, maybe it's, doesn't matter. Crime is a classic example. You can look at the national trends, you can look at economic trends, you can look at what is really driving crime up when it goes up. But to the people in the city, they don't care. They blame the mayor of that city for crime being up, even if it's up everywhere. So
yeah, we've had it's like the situation's like, we've had this problem for like 10 years, 15 years now. Everybody in office has been trying to work on it. No one's found a complete solution to it. You've been in office 2 months. You haven't fixed it yet. You're screwed up.
Right. Or the previous administration could have actually caused the problem, and maybe things were okay when the previous person was in office because those effects weren't felt yet, and because this is a long-term thing. So if you're dealing with economic factors, it could take time for the effects to really be felt by the average person. By the time that happens, that could be months or a year plus later. Someone else is in office now, and they're like, well, when the previous person was in office, things were better, but they were the one who screwed it up, and now the blame falls on the one who's there now as those effects are being felt. And if that person in office now does things to fix it, you might not fully feel the effects of the fix until the next person gets in. And so, these are all long-term solutions, but I think people demand short-term help, especially when things aren't going well. I mean, you can kind of understand that people get frustrated, but I think you have to be able to think this through and say, yeah, a lot of these things don't happen overnight. Crisis of this magnitude, any of these things that we're talking about, they take time.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Fixing anything usually it takes a lot more effort and a lot more time than it does to break it, so.
Right. Somebody once said, when it came to the 2008 financial crisis, and then when Obama got into office, and of course things were still bleak initially, that someone said the Republicans drove us into the ditch, and now they're complaining about the cost of the tow truck.
Right. Yeah. And it happens, it happens with everybody, especially when we switch politicians, right? When a new person comes in. People seem to have short attention spans in that regard. And it's like, forget about what happened before. It's like, well, you're here now, like fix it. Like we elected you to fix it. You got to fix it now. But, you're like, well, but wait a minute, like this happened, like a lot of stuff has to be dealt with. Like, no, fix it. Right.
Or it's worse now than it was. Yeah, but the other guy actually made it worse. And I'm trying to stop it from being a complete disaster.
Right. So
it's just the way of the world. But
yes. So it looks like we've come to the end.
We have. That was bleak. We've come to the end.
We have. It could be. Yes. So bottom line this week.
Yeah. What is the bottom line, Jay?
Oh, on me. All right. I think let's make kind of an extension off of what we just spoke on. Let's exercise a little bit of patience and understanding in when we're trying to fix situations and right the ship, because it does take a little bit of time to get out of situations that we might have gotten into quickly. And I think for me, sometimes the idea is when we look at how the cost of gas happens at the pump, you may be paying, let's say, and I know people are going to be crazy. I say, for example, just a round number, say it's $1.50 a gallon now versus, and then
I wish.
Yeah, okay, I don't know, what is it, $5 now? I don't know. Let's say it's five. Let's say it's $5 a gallon now, and then the price of oil drops. People immediately think that the price at the pump is going to go down or should go down immediately. However, they don't take into consideration that the gas station or the gas company had to buy it at that higher price, and so they're not operating at a loss. Has to sell it at that price until they can get into the new reserve that they bought at a lower price. And I think that's kind of what happens with situations, especially when it goes from politician to politician. Someone that was in before, or an ideology before, or a law that came from before, sets up a situation that can't just be overturned immediately. And we have to understand that and make sure that we make allowances for that, so that we give our elected officials a chance to do what we put them there to do. Now, if they don't do it afterwards, that's a different situation. But we can't just be so fickle as to think that, okay, new politician, new day, it's going to happen day one. It doesn't work that way. So
despite what they tell us, right? I'm going to do it all on my first day.
Even though that's what they tell us, right. So I think that's the bottom line. Let's have a little bit of understanding and patience in that regard. That doesn't mean we don't, hold them to the fire. We absolutely must do that, but understand that these things do and can take some kind of time.
Well said. And of course, people can find us everywhere podcasts can be heard. You can subscribe and get the audio pushed directly to your device. We are on YouTube at Nuance Show, on Instagram as well. So drop us a comment. And happy Thanksgiving to everyone. We'll be back next week. As always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time.